Alright, for this video I wanted to go over the IRS Form 8850 and the Department of Labor's Form 9061. So these forms are completed and filed with your state workforce agency, and they're in connection with the Work Opportunity Tax Credit at the federal tax level. So I've got sample forms in front of us that we'll walk through, but before we get into those, I do want to quickly go over a slide I have here with some background information on the credit itself. What are the amounts? And generally, what are the procedures you need to follow as both an employee and an employer to get this credit for the employer, right? So the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, again, it's a federal tax credit, and it's designed as an incentive to employers to hire individuals that are part of what the federal government deems to be targeted groups or individuals that are, it's difficult for them to find a job, right, to put it bluntly. And so what the government does is they provide these credits to employers as an incentive to want to hire them. Okay, so not a bad thing. Obviously, it's good to get more and more people into the workforce, and so that's what this credit is designed to do. So who's a member of a targeted group? Well, you can find the specific guidance here. So Internal Revenue Code section 51D1 Cap A through Cap J. That has the list of individuals, and some examples include qualified veterans, ex-felons, individuals on the SNAP benefits program, right? So to name a few. Now, what is the amount of the credit? Well, the credit is taken on the employer's federal tax return. Okay, and so the credit is going to be 40% of wages paid to employees that work at least 400 hours for the employer during the year, or it's 25% of the wages paid to an employee that works between 120 and 400. Now, you got to have somebody that works at least that 120 mark, or else there's no federal tax credit available. Now, there's no cap on the credit amount, right? Except for individuals that are qualified veterans or long-term family assistance recipients, right? So if you hire somebody that's an ex-felon that qualifies under this program, whatever amount of wages you pay them, you'll get the federal credit at these percentages, and there's no cap. The same doesn't apply if you hire a qualified veteran or somebody under this long-term family assistance program. And if you're looking for more guidance on those specific caps, because there are ranges, so you do have to be pretty precise here. In the form 5884, that's where you actually claim the tax credit itself. The instructions have more of a breakdown on what those caps are. Okay, so how do we qualify? What steps do the employer and the employee need to take? Well, the employer is the one that ultimately claiming the credit, and so they need to do the legwork to make sure that this individual qualifies. So the employer has to file a completed 8850 and the 9061 with the state workforce agency, so whatever department that is in whatever state you as an employer operate. Okay, so the employee is going to complete the 8850 first. They provide that to the employer completes their section, and then the employer and employee generally complete the 9061 at the same time, and you'll see why. Because the 9061 has information that both parties are going to have to provide. Okay, so let's look at the forms. Okay, so here's the 8850 form. Pretty straightforward, and it is a pre-screening notice, right? So what's important to remember is that you as an employer, you are allowed to ask for this information before you hire the worker. Now, the worker can obviously refuse to provide this, that's well within their right, but you as an employer are also allowed to ask for this because, again, you want to know if this individual is going to qualify because that's part of the incentive program, right? You want to know that you're going to be eligible to get a credit before you hire that person. So the applicant, in this case, we've got John Smith. So this is the prospective employee. So he fills out his name, social security number, and then his address and wherever he lives, right? So a contact number, telephone, and then if you are under the age of 40, provide your date of birth. Okay, so John was born June 16th, 1992. Now, in the section below here, this is where John has to certify what targeted group he falls under. Now, section 1, number 1 here, check if you've already received conditional certification from the SWA. This is often the case, right? So if you are a convicted felon and you're out of jail, or perhaps you were a convicted felon but you never did any kind of jail time, also possible, you are already likely liaising with a workforce agency to try to get you work. And so the state workforce agency might already have approved you as an individual in these targeted groups. And so you can take that documentation to the employer and show them, hey, look, I've already been approved, so I can check box 1. That is a Department of Labor Form 9062. So 9061 is what we're going to be working on today with this form. 9062 is that conditional certification that you've already been pre-approved. But in this case, we're going to assume he doesn't have that. So he would check box 2 because he is a he is a person that falls within one of these categories, right? So during the past year, so this is his item right here, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th bullet point down, right? During the past year, I was convicted of a felony or released from prison for a felony. And so what we'll see on the DOL 9061 form, that's where he provides more information about his conviction and his release date. Okay, so in this case, John's checking box 2, and then we move on to the rest of the form. Now, John has to sign this form, right? So at the bottom here, job applicant signature, he signs and dates, and then he provides this form. It's 2 pages. He provides this to the employer. Now the employer completes the rest of it. So we have here our sample company, telephone number, EIN, complete the address, and then contact person. So this is an entity. If you want to be a little more thorough, you can list the person at the company that should be contacted to answer more information about the applicant. So we have Jane Doe here. Let's call her, she's an owner of the LLC. So we have Jane Doe, her information, and then more information here on the applicant itself, right? So the applicant started the hiring process and provided this information on April 22nd. Went through the interview process, everything looked good, so he was offered a job on April 29th, so a week later. And then he accepted the job and was officially hired May 2nd, and then started another week later, right? So that's not an atypical timeline for this kind of procedure. Okay, so that's the form 8850. So once that's done, and the individual has been hired and they're starting work, then the individual and the company can go ahead and complete the next piece, right? This is the DOL 9061. So this form, together with the 8850, have to be completed and signed and sent to the state workforce agency. You got to send both, right? So 2 pieces here. You can't just send one. So again, more information on the employer and employee. So the employer could complete this top section here. So the company name, address and telephone number, and the EIN. And then the rest of this is effectively information that the applicant's going to have to provide. So we have John Smith here, his social security number. He has never worked for this employer before, right? And the job start date was May 9th. He's making $16 an hour. And then he's going to be a driver for the company, right? And then a bunch of yes/no questions here, right? So question 12 asks for your age. And then 13 questions about veteran or U.S. Armed Services history. And then questions 14, information on the SNAP program. So you'll notice that a lot of these questions might not apply. It depends on the history of the applicant, right? And why are they qualifying as a targeted group member? Okay, so again, just answer all the appropriate yes/no questions. So box 17 here is applicable to our applicant, right? So he was convicted of a felony or released after the conviction. So in this case, John, he was convicted in July of 2021, so about a year ago at the time of submitting this application. And then his release date was in 2022, so a couple months before he took this job with the company. Okay. Now, again, continue to answer the yes/no questions. Line 24 should be information that the employer kind of accepted from the applicant to determine their eligibility. So in this case, John asserted that he was a convicted ex-felon, and he provided the police reports, the criminal records, whatever was necessary, as part of the trial process and his release from prison. And so the employer used that as information to get their own kind of comfort that this individual was part of a targeted group. Because remember, in this example, John doesn't have that pre-certification, right? So the employer has to ask more questions. Okay, so then, if John was the person that completed this, he would sign and then check the box for applicant. Again, this form can be completed by, as you can see here, a number of different parties, right? So the employer or the applicant, a third-party consultant, could be hired to complete this form. But in most cases, the employer, again, they help fill out that top section, but then the applicant is responsible for perhaps completing the rest of it because they're the only one that are going to know the rest of these questions. Good to always do it, at the same time. Like employer, employee, sit down and complete this form together, and then it just makes it easier. Okay, so once all that information is completed, everything is signed, all the information looks good, then the employer goes ahead and forwards this to the appropriate agency in your state where the company is set up and where your employee is going to be based and working, right? So send that over to the appropriate SWA. They'll review the information and then they'll give you a response that says whether or not this individual is qualified. And if they are, then that's good news for you as the employer. Now, you have to make sure that you pay that person the stated wage, and they have to get enough hours during the year, because remember, the credit is 40% of the wages if they work over 400 hours. If they're between 120 and 400, then it's 25% of the wage amount. And if for some reason John is higher but only works 20 hours during the year, then there's no credit available. So that they're conditionally approved for the credit, but if they don't hit the hours, then you can't take the credit. Okay, so that covers it for this tutorial. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions on these types of credits, please leave me a comment below. I will also put a link below to how to complete the actual work opportunity tax credit form. And again, that's filed with your business tax return. So if you're an S Corp, it goes with the S Corp return or partnership return. And then ultimately, if it's a pass-through entity, the credit is taken on your 1040, but a lot of moving pieces there, so you want to make sure you do it correctly. All right, so again, that covers it. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Thanks.